it did. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Motion Design Hotline. I am one of your hosts, Evan Abrams, joined, as always, by
always.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes not, I guess. One rare
Usually,
time. Yeah.
As usual.
Joined in spirit and in body with our other co-host, Kyle Hamrick. Kyle, how you doing today?
Fantastic. I think this is going to be a fun show. We're literally doing game-related stuff.
Yeah.
So...
I mean, sorry, I meant to ask the real question of the day. Would you like to play a game,
Kyle? No, I would not like to play a game. I would like to make cheesy promos for a game that we made up. How about that?
Yeah. And I would say excellent promos. So what we're doing today, folks, this is the Motion Design Hotline. We take your motion design related problems and try to convert them into content that is hopefully helpful. Ooh, that was a good run. And in this program today, we are talking specifically about game promos. I am a very cool person who has excellent, interesting hobbies, but Kyle loves board games. So I love board games too, Kyle.
I would dispute that, but I'm about halfway through an extremely annoying puzzle that I almost swore off when I started it, but I'm stubbornly persevering, so I can't really dispute.
What are we talking? Is this one of those like 10,000 piece all gradient puzzle?
So it's a circular puzzle of the moon, but because the moon is basically just a big gray thing, you actually do it. I've been doing it upside down. Because it has like A, B, C, and D for the different quadrants. So I'm basically just matching up the letters.
Right.
But this puzzle's really poorly cut. So it's very frustrating.
Well, hey, you know what's not frustrating? Our well cut together show. So we are going to be talking about board game promos specifically. So I kickstart way too many board games. I see a lot of these things. I thought, Kyle and I are experts. We could help people. So generally, if you're prototyping a board game, you really just have a bunch of image files. You might have some STL or OBJ files for your little miniature mechs that are going to stomp over the lands of Azeroth.
You do need, I think it's pretty much required that every game has little minis these days.
Exactly. Yeah, they got to be custom made. Or if you're making them out of wood, these are just simple extrudes. So Kyle's got some stuff about working up those things and converting and creating them and moving those around in After Effects using some of the newer 3D features. And I am, of course, a huge Magic the Gathering fan, so I'm going to be talking about card game stuff. So get your 4/4 tramples out, baby. It's time to...
I mean, we've... Obviously, the two of us have completely solidified the rules for Keyframe the Game. We may not share all of those with you, and if it happens that we say any of those out loud and they change between now and the end of the show, then that is what's correct, because that's how the rules work.
Yeah, it's a real Cones of Dunshire right now. So Kyle, I'm going to jump over to my screen because I have the smoothest of playbacks.
Jump.
And let's enjoy your little promo here for Keyframe the Game, which is pretty dope. So
Evan referenced battle chess, and so I had that in my head, and I knew a piece had to get zapped by lightning.
Yeah,
nice curves, client notes.
Yeah, it's a card-driven battling game on a chessboard. You've already got all the pieces. So anyway, in this, Kyle, all of these things, you've made them all yourself with your own bare hands. So let's dip into it, and we'll take it away. If you, good people of the chat, have problems, you can let us know. You can let us know live. If you have problems with our show, you can let us know in the chat. You can give that a try. We'll see how we respond to those. And then if you have bigger, more existential, more motion designy problems, please submit them to us using the form.
Which you can, of course, find on motiondesignhotline.com, which is a real website for real people.
And then it becomes this real show. But yeah, if we do anything that's confusing or weird, let us know in the chat. We'll stop. We'll talk about it. That's the great thing. If you're watching this on replay, we'll still do it. It's an interesting time mechanic. So, Kyle, what do you got going on? What is this weird app that you've got open in front of you?
You mean
this unfamiliar space?
The media player? Or
well, no, the
Illustrator. Yeah.
We're an
So
After
yeah.
Effects show. What's going on?
So, well, of course, but most of the time that you're working in After Effects, you are very often using Photoshop and Illustrator to create the elements that you're going to work with. And I know most people would not necessarily think, well, I need a 3D object. Obviously, I'm going to create that in Illustrator. But in the pretty recent future,
Yes.
pretty recent past, we got the ability to do just that. So all these little, it's not hard to see that all of these little sort of chess pieces here are the same thing, just colored differently. And I just created that right here in Illustrator. So in the 3D features here, you do have a variety of things. You can extrude stuff. We've talked about this a little bit before. The inflate is pretty fun, especially for text. So try like kind of using sort of a bubbly typeface, and then try this inflate, and you can get some, neat stuff. But
I will say, as we proceed, because it's very GPU intensive, you may notice some lag between what Kyle says and what Kyle does. Hopefully everything is smooth and good, and you let us know if there's problems in the chat, and we'll do stuff.
We'll address it. I'm going to be using this revolve functionality right here. And for that, you just create a path like this, and then we're going to revolve it around something. So you select this path. This is just a stroked path here, and then I'll click revolve. And right off the bat, it's not going to look quite like I want. It creates a cool vase, but that's not what I wanted. So right here, you actually get to choose whether you want to offset from the left edge or the right edge. It does the left by default, so I'll choose right edge. And now there we go. There's my chess piece. So that's pretty neat, and I can use these sliders to customize my view, so you can actually roll this around and do whatever. And this is definitely not a 3D modeling app. You can create 3D models in here, but this is about where your complexity is going to level off. You can make neat stuff like this, and if I set this back to front, the cool thing is that as you're looking at it, I could say, oh, well, I actually wanted this part to be different. So you can live edit these curves that are being revolved and have a lot of control over that. But you're not going to be able to, like, say, if you were making more of a rook type piece and you wanted to sort of have notches around the top, that's beyond the scope of what Illustrator is going to do.
Mm-hmm. But of course, if you did have those things, if you've got OBJs, we can bring those in too, right? Like if someone else has modeled them, we can throw those in.
Totally. So, now that I have this revolved, obviously I don't want it to just be a black piece. That could work okay, but we are a highly branded show here with extremely specific colors. And also, you have this entire materials tab right here. You can wrap graphics around these models, which I'm not going to do, but that's great if you want to, previs one of your designs on a cylinder or on a box or something like that. You can see how it wraps around that surface, which I think is a big part of why that is in here. But you have this whole materials list, and you get access to all of these substance materials that are really cool. So there's all kinds of metallic stuff and paint and like stucco and wood. I know Evan is a fan of woodworking, as am I actually. So here is a wood texture, and we can check this out here.
Kyle, we have the coolest hobbies.
We do. Yeah.
Oh, that is pretty nice. I like.
Honestly, yeah, I think this looks good. Yeah. And so on all of these textures, you get actually a tremendous amount of control. So you just need to scroll down and look at all these controls. These are just for this material. And so you can do stuff like kind of work with the different, obviously for a texture like this, you have a couple different colors. You have something that's kind of driving this texture. And so you can say, like, how much do you want this to repeat? And then what are the colors here? So let's take one of these and turn it to, say, our pink, which is EF5CA1. And so one of those colors, there we go. That base color will become the pink. Mm. And then you've got all kinds of variation. And I mean, honestly, just get in here and play around with these. You can do all kinds of really neat stuff.
Yeah, and these are kind of related to Substance, right? So if
Yes,
people are,
exactly.
are familiar with Substance or you've played around with that at all, it's going to be there. You do have access to, if you don't put any textures on them, kind of PBR controls for things like roughness and specular.
Yeah.
Speculare. I don't know why I say it like that. But yeah,
I don't know why you do anything you do.
It's impossible to tell. But yeah, like you've got options. So, but and Keys is saying they used it to make a like a pop can, like a soda can, right? And so like you can pretty easily dial in a kind of brushed aluminum look. You can put your label, your sticker that'll wrap around or decal that design. Like it's got juice, as we say.
And the Substance apps are an additional. They do cost you extra beyond the original Creative Cloud, but Dimension does still exist, and so you can open these things in there also and do texturing in there. So, yeah. Or of course your other 3D app of choice. Once you get this dialed in. And what I'm about to say is what's crucial to being able to do that. Right now, this only lives here in Illustrator. And so if we want to be able to export this to use it somewhere else, because you could totally like make this part of an illustration or whatever, which is kind of the point here. But if you go back to the Object tab, kind of the main tab of this 3D and materials, there's a little thing down here, Export 3D Object. And so you can click that, and it looks like I've already got an instance of it here. And then you just have to tell it what format you want. If you're going to send it to After Effects, you want either an OBJ or a GLTF. And so you can export that. I'm not going to do that because I've already exported it, but it's just like the regular asset export. You just direct it to a folder and it saves the thing with all this material info as well.
Yeah. Now, unfortunately, we don't yet have a fun shorthand for GLTF. I've been saying GLTF myself.
GLTF, yep. Or GULBs.
Yeah.
GLBs.
We say GULBs. Just like I say JPEG for that. So people of the chat, let us know how you would pronounce GLTF. Just phonetically write it out, and that'll really help us out moving forward.
So anyway, choose your, either OBJ or GLTF, export it. It is going to export it as asset 1 in this case, unless you've named your thing a little more carefully than I did. That's fine. So you come over to After Effects and you just import that file, which I can show you if you really want me to prove it, but it's just putting a file in here.
Well, you probably should because it's going to prompt you about like scale stuff.
Well,
right?
it normally would, but since I've already imported them into this project, I'm not going to get that that prompt.
Okay, so the same, because you've already imported the same model, it's remembering the settings.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me, I do want to show this real quick, just to kind of prove. Okay, so if you are not already on the advanced 3D engine, when you bring one of these in, you're going to get this little pop-up that's like, hey, we need to switch to a different 3D render. That's fine. Just say okay. That's all good. And then you will get this little pop-up here where you can actually adjust the object scale before you sort of fully import it. And yes, sometimes people are like, oh, well, you don't want your scale above 100. That's a little different with 3D models. They're made from geometry. They're not just pixels. So this is a little different than like scaling up a JPEG, for example. And 3D models can be created at wildly different scales. So if you want it real big, you can do that before you bring it in, just so that you're kind of working at, some things might come in like this size, and you need to scale it up to 900% to be able to work with it. That'd be a bummer.
Yeah, I often find like things are usually like 100 times too big because they're meters when they should be centimeters.
Yeah, exactly.
Or centimeters when they should be meters, and the scale of this is really going to, I think, impact some people's performance sometimes. Yeah. Because the assumption of, is it too big or too small? And then you're like, well, I got to scale it down to like 10%. Like, whoa, hold on. Your margin for working with that has just changed. So meters, centimeters, pixels, gotta make that go. One great suggestion for how to pronounce GLTF is GULTIF. DS9 character. I like that.
Yep, I really like that. I also like, right below that is just a suggestion of calling them girlfriends.
Look, all my girlies are three-dimensional, so That's just how it is, you know.
So
quickly look if there's a .bf file. While you do your thing, I'm going to look up.
Why don't you look for a .bff?
Okay, I will.
That's the file we can use when we exchange files, just you and me. Yep. So, all right, folks. Here is that model, just in a different color, obviously, imported here. And I'll just show you real quick how I made this board. I just created a flat thing, and much to my joy, I actually used the checkerboard effect. There you go. Here it is. So the checkerboard effect just gives you the ability to make, squares, alternating squares. I've never used it to make a checkerboard, but here we are. And then I just put a little bit of texture over it so it would look like it was a thing, right?
Yeah.
And then that is nested in another composition so that I could make the board edge and so that I could extrude the edge here. Just gave it a little bit of extrusion there because I figured I would probably see these edges as we moved around.
Right.
And that way it has some depth to it.
Yeah, and like you can get even more complex with like slightly bigger extrudes, get a fancy bevel going on. And .bff is backup file format. So there you go.
Okay.
Because your best friends always have your back. That's an important thing to remember. I don't think we can really send anything to each other because it's kind of an obscure archival format that I don't think can open anymore.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so once you have your surface and your object, now we need to figure out how to kind of work with these. I'm going to go ahead and make a duplicate of this thing, and let's just reset this back to its normies. So, most objects have their anchor point kind of centered up, and that's not going to make a lot of sense here. So what you probably want to do is figure out like what surface of your thing needs to be what you're actually controlling it from, right?
Yeah.
So,
what is the bottom or what is the top?
So just in case you're not working with 3D very often, you do have some controls down here. And even without a camera in your scene, I have one, but it's turned off. You can choose from a variety of views here. And I'm going to choose front. So this is absolutely locked to a front view. Looks like I actually did a really good job here of just eyeballing that. But I'm going to move my anchor point so that it's not here in the middle of the model. It's right here at the bottom, because that is, of course, the point that I would want to be contacting the board. And so then I can set this back to my active camera. And again, even without a camera actually on and active, you can use the camera tools that are up here to orbit around and change your view. And if you end up getting, way off and you're like, oh no, where did I go? This little drop down also gives you a reset, reset default camera. So you can always get it right back where you want it to be. So you can see right here, my piece is hovering a little bit above the board. When you're working in 3D space like this, you do want to kind of think about how you're going to approach it. There's a couple different ways that you could do this. So you can see this other piece that I already animated here. I just straight up made some keyframes for it. This is kind of that move where it jumps. So let's just kind of come back out a little bit so we can see that happen. Let's tighten up that work area. There we go. So you can just dive in here with your keyframes, and this is just a unified 3D position property, which means that you have a 3D motion path. And so that is like, you do get a lot of cool capabilities here. Like if you want to make your path super weird and windy, even in 3D space here, you can do a lot of cool stuff. But being able to navigate a motion path in all 3 dimensions means you need to be really careful about what you're doing. And if you're doing complex moves, it can get kind of convoluted here. And
I was going to say, if you wouldn't mind kicking into Draft 3D, just so if people are working on kind of slower machines, and like, all these textures and whatever, like, just so you can get a vibe for like what that might be.
Yep, exactly. And honestly, I could turn off the board edge. So when you turn on Draft 3D, you do get a couple other neat things here. One of them is that you can see beyond the edges of the board, and you can turn on a grid for the ground plane, which in this case is, lines up pretty well with where I ended up working. And so you could animate this piece without the board in place and add that later if you wanted to.
Yeah. I always want to be conscious of people on minimum spec machines.
Yeah, very much so. And there we go. So this can also be useful to just set this up if you want to be able to see beyond the bounds of your canvas, which again in 3D can be very helpful because sometimes things get just outside your view and you're like, where did that thing go? Oh, there it is. So I'm going to turn that back off. I will also point out, coming back over here to the left, the adaptive resolution. A lot of people have probably not used this. It's been not super helpful for a while, but particularly with Draft 3D, it is extremely helpful. And so that combination of knocking down the effects and lighting and stuff like that, plus adaptive resolution, it's going to help you move a lot faster as you're doing things like moving layers around and things like that, and it will kind of catch up to you as it needs to. It down reses when you move stuff around, and then it reses it back up when it needs to look good again. So I want to not get too far into the weeds here, but I want to show you another potential option when you are moving things on a 3D surface like this. One of the things you need to kind of think about is like, what do your pieces need to do and how do you want to control them? Now you'll see right here, I do have the 3D gizmo because this is a 3D object. And so if this piece were just like moving along the squares of the board, I could totally just use these single axis controls here to just move it, this way and then move it this way, create some keyframes. And it's pretty easy to, create like straight line moves in something like this. But when you start doing something like having it leap off the board, well, it's like, okay, I can create my keyframes, and like I know it needs to go over here, but it also needs to go up in between. What I did for this other one was created this middle keyframe here, and then I used a thing called Rove across time. You can right click on any keyframe and choose Rove across time, and that will put it. It kind of becomes sort of a floating keyframe. It times itself where it needs to be based on the way that you ease these, which can be helpful when you're doing something like this. But again, I'm going to need to try to figure out the best, there we go, best color here. You'll still need to actually like finesse your motion path, and finessing it in one dimension doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Now you're going to need to look like, did I actually get it? See, you can see it has like a little bit of a curve to it this way. So it can be pretty sticky just to like straight up keyframe a thing like this. So a lot of times what you might want to try instead, again, depending very much on what your objects need to do, is create a null object for yourself. Just go new, null object. You can get that up from the layer menu as well. Null objects can be turned into 3D. And so then you could take this and make sure that it lines up with your board. In this case, I put my board at 1000 on Y just because that felt like a nice round number. And so then I could put my null right there, or you could parent it to your surface, which maybe I'll do that. And then you can parent your piece to that. And so you should be able to sort of zero it out here, and then it'll be exactly on that null. Now your null is definitely going to be perfectly on that plane. So you could do some moves with that null, and then maybe for this one, you would do, say, like you're, actually moving your piece here, and then with the piece itself, now you have a little bit more leeway to maybe separate the dimensions, and you could just do your Y movements on that piece here. So obviously I'm not easing these, but that way your null is doing the actual movement, like the actual navigation, and then you have a little bit more individual control for, in this case, vertical movement.
Yeah, and I think this will be a lot more familiar to anyone who's using like Cinema 4D, Blender, like other 3D things, where pretty much every property is really separated out from each other, and the value graph is the one that takes primacy in that type of a space a lot.
And exactly to that point, on a unified position, you don't have the ability to use the value graph, but you can once you separate them. So I've separated this Y position, and so now I can make this as smooth as I want and have it line up perfectly with that null movement or not. And so that might, in this case, I don't think that worked super well, but you could fine tune this however you need to. Another thing that you can think about, and here I started with my board laid flat like this. The board is already rotated. I can prove it if you want me to. It's already rotated 90 degrees. It's obviously a flat thing, and I rotate it like this. But you're in 3D space, so there's nothing stopping you from actually working like this, sort of straight on, and move your thing around like this. And then you could actually use your X and Y values to move the object around on the flat thing, and then use Z like this. And then once you sort of work that out, you could just use a camera to get the angle you actually want. So it all just kind of depends on what's going to work for what you need to do and what makes sense for your brain, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, this will really bake people's potato. When you look at things in 3D and After Effects, are you looking down upon something by default, or are you looking forward at things by default? Mull that over in your mind and tell us what Z means.
Yeah.
So, Kyle, I want to cut you off. I want to jump over to mine real quick.
Please do.
And then we'll come back and I want to talk about that piece falling down and maybe some of the glowing stuff.
Cool.
I've got something here. So we're going to use some less three-dimensional sort of pieces. Hold on. Let's make sure that I'm on the correct keyboard here. This one. Yes. Okay, here we go. So this is, and we're seeing my stuff. Good. That looks fine. Excellent. Okay, so here we have some cards, and it's a pretty simple deal out a hand of cards, fan them, move them down, shine them, and then floop them down. And the important thing I want to get into in this little demonstration, everything so far is just keyframes, moving the stuff around, whatever. These are actually curvy floopy cards. So you can see here as they move back, they are bending. And I don't know if you've ever bent something using our bendy tools here. Let me just grab a thing down here. It's beautiful. If you are in advanced 3D.
Or the Cinema 4D renderer.
Yeah, I mean, they'll both bend. Will it bend? So you can see here, we can give it a bend. And like this. Now it only bends upon the one axis, and it has an interesting way of bending away from your anchor point in sort of an unhelpful way. But anything that is a footage layer like this can be bent in this way. And we can crank up the curvature here so it looks less PS1 and get us more into, I want to say PS3 level at 16 segmentations. But if you're into that, you could definitely have fewer segmentations. Nothing stops you from having an incredible number of segmentations. No one can stop you.
Well, your computer could.
Yeah, that's true. The evil demon inside your computer could stop you. But the difficulty here, it's only doing it on the one axis. So if I actually wanted to like waggle something at somebody like this, waggle, 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 right? Hard to do. Or if I wanted to like snap something down to the table, as I do dramatically when I turn over my trap card. I apologize for using my Yu-Gi-Oh voice all the time on this show. I don't
never apologize.
I want you to know, I love Yu-Gi-Oh. I love highly dramatized sports animes. I do it with love. Okay. I don't not like that stuff. So how would we then get this to curve the way we want? What do we have to do first to kind of make that happen? And step one is we actually want to take whatever our footage is. And these are kind of early prototypes in let's call it the Uno, but for keyframes that I've been working on here. Obviously, if you play a hold on a linear, that's not as good as playing an eased on a linear, something to that effect. But the first kind of step to making this sort of work, I'm going to say, give me a 1000 by 1000 kind of square out of this. This is going to allow me to say, okay, the way I know this will bend is across, like the axis of bending will be there. So if I wanted it to bend the other way, I must first tilt this, right? So we'll do that first, and then, or maybe instead of doing it there, we might say we're going to take this, we're going to put it into a thing, and that way I've got this going on, and I might say let's transform it first. Let me do a little transformy form on here, and let's go ahead and rotate that by 90, and then we make it three-dimensional, and then we give it a curve. Hey, that's curving on the axis that I want. Excellent, excellent. And so now if I rotate it thusly, we're curving the way we want. So far, so good, right? Things are curving the way we want.
Mm-hmm.
However, if this was truly curving the way I want, it would probably be also bending around this point down here. So if I wanted to do that, then I would assume that if I were to bend it forward, that would kind of remain fixed in my fingies, and then I pull the top of it. How are we going to make that happen? Well.
Cinema 4D?
I have my methods. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and actually link a rotational aspect like this to the bendiness, the curvature here. So I believe that was going to be a Y rotation. Let's link it to the actual curvature value there, and let's find out how excellent that is. Wow, Kyle, that's pretty good. I'm gonna say that's actually working out pretty identically to how we want. Now, oddly, right, I would say this is actually working pretty good. It gets a little spacey around 80 as it
it's kind of jumping up.
Goes up like that. This might be as good as you want to do, right? Because you've got this going like wag, 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 wag like that. You're good to go. However, I would suggest actually adding a little bit more stuff to this before we kind of call it a day. So I'm going to set up a variable, and we're going to call this a variable named like bend or bendness, just so we can keep track of it. And I want to deploy a kind of either a linear interpolation, which will look at the bend, and the bend is of course going to run from negative 100 to 100. That's the range it can do. And if you wouldn't mind taking us from say negative 90 to 90, or however you feel that should go. So now if the curvature reaches 100, this is fully reached over and knocked on the floor, right? But you might even say that actually, what I know that if this number gets to around 80, that might be enough. So if I go like 80 and 80, that's going to sort of change the way that this seems to be like flooping and flopping over. And you might never go any further than that, right? So you're setting up sort of what the relationship is between these two numbers. And in a way that's just a little bit more nuanced than linking it directly. So that might be pretty useful.
Linear allows you, we talk about linear a lot. It's one of my favorite functions, but in short, it allows you to map one property to a different property of another type, but specifically a range for each of those. So that's what Evan was just doing.
Yeah. And its cousin is the ease. So you can kind of see how that has affected it a little bit more. It feels stiffer when I use the ease, right? Because it's not as extreme. Yeah. So armed with this information, we can now produce a little bit better movement out of our cards as they're snapping around. Now, I'll leave it up to the viewer to work out challenge mode, do it diagonally, right? How one might do that. If you wanted a 45-degree bend on this, right? But just remember the process is we are pre-tilting our asset. We know it has to arc along that one spine. So we're sort of doing and undoing the stuff. The thing that remains consistent, though, is the kind of rotational portion of this, that we must use orientation to get it the way we want, and then we use the Y rotation to do other stuff. Now, you might be a little bit bummed that oopsie doodle, Evan, now I cannot manipulate this with keyframes. That's doing nothing for me. So instead, you could
contraire.
Yeah, well, we got some. Is that doing anything for anyone? You could come in here and you could say value plus. And so now value, and this goes for any and all properties, value is simply what value is this? And so now you can see I can set keyframes and it will simply add in the extra values that come from curving this thing around. So that's kind of the idea that sets up. Now that we know how it's done, the magic has been ruined, and you now know how this works. It's me, Mysterio, the trick ruiner. And so here we have keyframing of curvature, of orientation, and of position to make these things flop down. And so the way that's going is as the position, and let's get into this graph. So if we observe the speed of it, it is kind of slowly coming out of the hand, and then it's accelerating towards the ground, and this is the point of maximum speed. If we look at some of the compatriots, actually, let's look at this thing first in the 2 view. Give me that 2 view, and we're going to look at it from, say, the right side. You can see that I've been doing a little bit of manipulation of the curves in here, but on the neighbors, they're mostly just going down straight, right? They're mostly just going straight to the mat. Not a lot of nuance to the way they're getting down there. As opposed to an example I'll get into later, spoilies, where there is going to be some juice on that. But the orientation here is being manipulated to give it a little bit of extra bend on a certain axis, right? And then the curvature is assisting in the rest of it. So we're blending these things together to get a little bit more reality out of this stuff, which is really what you want when you're trying to show these things off. If I just remove the curvature thing, it's not as cool, right? Mm-hmm. As we look at this middle card, it feels very rigid and computers, which we're trying to not be computers over here. So that's one way that we can do it. The other thing I wanted to talk to here is intersections. So the other thing to take away from this is the timing and intersections of this stuff. If you start playing around with these cards, unlike real cards, these can slice through each other in unpleasant ways.
Phase into one another.
Warp. And even though, close-up magic, they appear to mush through each other, in this case, they really do. And the way that we offset those is simply by using our Z space or our rotations to make sure that they do not intersect with each other in subtle means. So that means tilting them just a little bit in your hand so that the two don't louver through each other. You just take them and then you tilt them a little bit more, or you tilt them the other way. That'll be good, because that's really what's happening when you hold two very thin cards in your hands. Question from Kyle.
So Evan, let's say that I have two things and they absolutely look right the way they are, but they keep intersecting. Is there any way that I could force them to not intersect without losing the way that they look?
Oh, there is. You could use the cheat code of slipping a break. So I don't know how to zoom in. If you look here at the 3D boxes, we've got cube, 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 cube. These all belong to a three-dimensional bin, we would say. If you break the bin, so this is said to be on top of this. They are in layer order. They're also in Z order. I'm going to mix them up. And you notice that this doesn't matter. Nobody cares.
Yep.
If I make a new adjustment layer, people are about to care. So this can now force, because we've broken the bin. Bin break. Is what has happened. I vote for After Effects to have more insane pop-ups come up when things happen. Because in my mind, they're happening. And you can see that how this is disrupting the order. Now, this is used often, like a lot, when you are doing like little dioramas of cut up photos. Yeah. Let's say you've got the HMS Titanic and it's intersecting with the water layer in a bad way. Then you're just like, okay, well, I'm going to slip a little adjustment layer in there, and suddenly things are working out invisibly, right? We're cheating it. We're cheating it.
Ultimately, if it looks fine, it is fine, right?
If it looks fine, it is fine. Only here in physical world, that's not true. But yeah, so that's my little tip from this. If you have a hand of cards, if you're fanning them out, all this stuff, and I'm not doing anything fancy or interesting in terms of systems or in terms of linking a lot of these things together. Because these are footage layers, we still get to enjoy all of the fun little effects on them. So these are just light sweeps that are going over. So in the heart of the cards is a light sweep, and that's a great way to kind of show off assets like this. If you want to get deeper into this, because I know we are running out of time here, then you can go to motiondesignhotline.com, download the files. Kyle, I want to go back to your screen because I want to talk about that roly piece. That looked so good. I want to see how that goes.
All right, thanks. And yes, the project files for every show will be up, probably about 10 or 15 minutes after the show ends. But you can get everything from every previous show there too. So Evan was calling out this piece that gets hit here from our client notes, and then it gets zapped. We'll see if I have time to talk about putting that effect on there. So ultimately, I don't think this is that complicated. Again, you just kind of have to think through what you're doing. And even in 2D, you may have the same thing. If you're rolling something on a flat surface, you might want to use a similar trick. So here is my pink piece. You can see the bounding box there. And I did this kind of like the first example I showed, where I just did this with straight up keyframes, although in this case, I did separate my dimensions. But to do something like a roll, that's just not really going to work. I probably could have keyframed the anchor point on here and probably done part of this, but this is a case where creating a null object, again, is really going to help you out.
Right, because if you keyframe the anchor point, you must also keyframe the position. Now you're doubling your work to do this.
Yeah, and crucially, you don't have the control to do what I'm going to do in a second, which is have different things happening at different times from different anchor points, which is really what's kind of crucial to a lot of these kind of real world movements here. So in this case, I actually have two nulls, and I didn't name these very well. I should have called this like Rolly and Tippy or something like that. So the piece is parented to Tippy, and Tippy is parented to Rolly. Okay. And you can see here's Tippy and here's Rolly all the way over here. Yeah, weird, right? So I kind of built this where I had the piece animated, and then Tippy is anchored right there at the very edge of the piece, and then it's using the Z rotation in this case to tip the piece over, and then there's a dunk, 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 little bit of bounce there. And this was just a lot of work in the graph editor. You can see a nice little bonk, 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 bonk. Kind of a, I don't know if I can get in close enough here, but you can see just a little bounce keyframe. And then after that has fallen over, oh, looky there. The head of this piece is right where I want Rolly to be. So I created Rolly kind of right in the middle of that ball that's on the top of the piece. And then everything is parented back to that. So that is using the Y rotation to spin everything on some other axis here. And so then I have that control for the piece to kind of roll around like it would naturally. Now, to be fair, a lot of this is kind of eyeballing this angle so that you can actually get it to look like it's contacting the board correctly. And if you look real close, since there's a little bit of a gap in the shadow there, I probably didn't get it totally right, but it looks close enough, I thought.
Well, as Theo says, if it renders, it tenders.
Yeah, I love it.
This is a good phrase. This is a quality phrase. Okay. Hopefully that helps people.
Yeah. Do you want me to quickly call out my effects, like a minute and a half or something like that? Toss it back to you? Or do you want to get back in yours?
I want to get back in mine.
Okay. We've talked about effects on 3D objects in the advanced render, which itself is enough of a mouthful.
Yeah. And because we're talking about a bit of realistic motion, that's the one I want to jump on here.
Yeah.
So here's what I got going on for you. I'm dealing some 3-card Monty over here. Flip, flip, flip. And then we're going to flip one over. Eventually. Floop. So the thing I want to talk about is this here. flip, flop, floop, kicking those out. That feels pretty good. That feels pretty Vegas to me.
And I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there's a really important thing going on here. You don't have a background, but you can feel the surface that those are landing on by the way those move.
Yeah.
So I just want to call that out as an example of like motion communicating something when it doesn't even exist.
Yeah, and it's all like, whoa, wait. It's almost like they're contacting something here, because then the inertia leaves it, right? That's the vibe that we want. How do we do this? Right? How do we do this? Kyle, how do we do this?
Keyframes, I assume.
Yeah, so let's just have a look at sort of the first one, because it's the most pronounced of them. Now, back to our original question, is Z a wall or floor? In my mind, it wall, so that's why it looks like this. So let's go ahead and make this into a nice fuchsia, and then we will be enjoying sort of like that, so that we can see this fuchsia as it comes down, and as it approaches the wall, I've dragged this handle out to give it a nice floor, and you see that the dots are nice and tight next to each other right here. And that's because here in the old speedo graph, yeah, same thing, coming in tight to the floor like this. We've dragged this handle out. So the more pronounced this gets, the more of a slide it is. And importantly, in this view, that doesn't look like anything, right? That looks like nothing. But in this view, you can really see the influence of this handle along that particular axis. So flatness, and now let's also look at over here the top, because I think the top will help tell the tale of the tape over here a little bit better too. That you can see like this from the top, that is actually like arcing. This is the table, so it's arcing towards the table and then sliding down like that. So this is like skidding across the table. So you want to make sure that as you hit the table, things are really tapering off. And the other thing that tells us this is going is the Z's rotation. It's shuriken style being thrown out there. Ha-cha-cha. Same type of graph, right? As the distance slows, so slows this. And you might even want to, and just give this a ponder. What if this stopped before that stopped? What does that mean? Well, it means the rotational energy is getting eaten up before the positional energy is being totally eaten. And then it ice slides for the last bit, right? Because rotational energy sticks harder when it pancakes, right? Like all these velocities are kind of independent of each other. They assist to whatever. Watch some curling. You're going to love it. But that's the idea. What does it mean if this takes longer than that? Well, right.
And if I can quickly call something out, Theo made a suggestion in the chat, which a lot of people do a lot of the times, is that you can do the move and then time remap it to work these curves. And in a lot of cases you can, but the issue there is that you don't then get the ability to separate properties like this.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say about sort of time remapping, there are two forces at play. One is the time, but the other is in fact this arc that I think is pretty critical, because as it kind of gets away from us, it's that depth that also tells us this is being dealt out, right? As opposed to this is being thrown from, you can't see me, I'm below the camera, but I'm making it rain over here. So these are things that you know, consider. The next part that I want to get you to consider is the card flip itself that's going on. I did this two ways. We're running out a bit of time. There's two ways to make card thick. And the important thing here is that even if the card, you have a front and a back, they're two JPEGs, they're infinitely thin. As soon as you see that space in between, the game's over. People have seen through your magic trick, all right, David Blaine. I see what you're just picking up one leg. That's not a trick. And spoilies for David Blaine levitates. So in these cases, it can be very helpful to actually make thickness. How do we actually make thickness? There are two ways. You can do it the classic way, which is a sandwich of these things. This is a this is an accordion, honk, which can be useful in the classic sense, using the old classic renderer, which has allowed, in this case, for me to do a little 3-card Monty with the eased keyframe here, and I can switch you over to, it's both backs of the cards or it's the linear keyframe. Ooh, gotcha. Or the hold keyframe. Tricks. But then if you have a whole deck of 52 cards, you make one, you essential properties it, switch them all over the place, right? Turns out the death card is actually the fool card, that kind of thing. So something to consider there. If you want to do real thickness, if you want to do advanced level thickness, those are being done with a, if I kind of just scale this is actually just an extruded middle, the same way Kyle did the chessboard, right? That's it. That's the same deal.
Yep.
So, and then we're just putting like an object on either side of it. Let me get this grid. I got to stop seeing the world with a grid over it. It's causing me some kind of mental anguish. But yeah, that's the idea, that we're really just extruding the thing, putting something on this side, and that's it, right? That's stamping this thing. I like whenever I make something like this to stick it on a null. That allows me to work probably thicker than I would or ordinarily, and then squeeze it together.
Yeah.
I warn thee, as you meddle with forces beyond our understanding, that you can see down here at like the 1%, we're getting texture rips down here.
Yeah.
The threshold at which these things will confuse, I think, is within like 1 or 2 pixels of each other, or like start to glitch between. So
they're actually occupying the same 3D space. It's just like if you have 2 layers at the exact same coordinates, they'll kind of both show up.
You smashed my voxels into each other, right? That's what After Effects is saying. Evan's very dismissive voice of the After Effects computer. The other thing I want to say about just getting things organized, I treat Z as wall, which allows me to then imagine as I do this that it feels a lot more like I'm getting a lower angle on table, because I treated floor as wall, right? Which is a little bit weird. But then things get a little wacky as I try to orbit it, right? So that can be tough. So just try to keep in mind your orientations, where you are, how you are, what's going on with the universe. We do know that floor is floor. Floor is floor because we can see the floor, right? Like they put the floor right down there. So floor is floor.
It's all flexible, so it's all whatever surface you want it to be. They can be ceiling if you like.
That's true. Before floor was floor, I always thought floor was wall. So there we go. Anyway, Keyframe the Game. Look for it at Target next year. So I know Gen Con just wrapped up, but get at us, CGE. Tim at CGE. Call me back. Okay, is there anything else? We got 2 minutes, Kyle. We should probably just do our wrap-up stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, hopefully we, covered these things in a way that made them at least semi-understandable. And of course, ultimately, this is all encouragement for you to try similar things yourself, because in the end, you kind of need to play with these, but hopefully our tips help you get there a little more easily, right?
Yeah, so hopefully you're going to be able to successfully help someone launch a Kickstarter, launch your own Kickstarter for a board game that you've designed in your garage, or teach people the obscure rules to euchre. Right and left bowers, what does that mean?
And of course, if we do make this into an actual game, all of you are now contractually obligated to purchase it. Sorry.
Well, you're obligated to play it, at least. We'll get it made and we'll hand it out at the next Max or something.
There you go.
That'll be so weird. Okay, I'm Evan Abrams. You can find me on the internet at EC Abrams. He's Kylosaurus Rex on the internet, Kyle Hamrick. MotionDesignHotline.com is where you can send us questions. The link to the form in which we intake those is also in the descriptions that you are looking at somewhere towards the bottom of the screen. Make sure you subscribe to Adobe Live on all the places that you can find it, on YouTube's, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on
Behance.
Are they on Blue Sky? We should be on all the places. Wherever you are, if you don't see Adobe Live on it, let someone know. Someone will get there. But we're going to be back next week. So we're going to see you next week, 4 o'clock. So let us submit your... Do we already have a thing for next week? What are we doing?
We do. Getting meta with graphics for streaming.
Oh, yeah. That's what we're doing. We're streaming graphics here on the show. It's gonna be a fun and interesting one. So if you're a streamer, if you support streamers, if you're in that stuff, then you're going to enjoy that. It's going to be wild and fresh. Anything else to tell the people, Kyle, while you're here?
I don't think so. I hope everyone's having a great summer, and that it's not too hot where you are. And if it is, maybe save some of the GPU work for the evening time when it's not so hot.
Yeah. You want to keep those computies cold. All right. Well, until next time, stay creative, be kind to each other, and we will see you all around the internet.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye for now. And now the button I want
Push it.
is